Preface. In Washington, D.C., behind the pompous facades of government buildings and strict etiquette, lies a dark, multi-layered secret. A secret that begins with the distant, cold Alaska and stretches to the very heart of American politics. Imagine this. Russian Emperor Alexander II signs a crucial treaty for the sale of a vast territory, but his right hand suddenly disappears, severed years before the assassination attempt. Historians say it was a terrorist bomb, but secret archives claim otherwise. They assert that in 1867, Alaska was sold not to the United States, but to a powerful, mysterious European company that used the Americans as mere proxies. $7,200,000, a sum that seems a mockery for a land the size of half of Europe. But it was not just gold. It was something more, something that connected several families on both sides of the ocean, families that for a century and a half have dictated their terms to the world. This story is not about conspiracies, but about the people who found themselves at the epicenter of this lie. It's about a young man whose family is part of this secret society, and a girl who lives believing the official version of history. Their love is a test that will either destroy them or reveal the truth. Chapter 1. The Shadows of Capitol Hill. James Madison ran his palm over the fogged glass of the Black Cat Cafe and looked at Eleanor again. She sat opposite him, completely absorbed in her laptop, her golden hair falling over the screen, her brows furrowed in a tight, pensive knot. In Washington, especially in the spring, everything breathed with moisture and freshness, but for James, the atmosphere in this cafe was heavy, like before a thunderstorm. He knew this pose of hers. She was working on her history dissertation. Eleanor, or Ellie as he affectionately called her, was one of those people who adored facts and documents. Her life, her beliefs, her everything was rigidly regulated by the official version of history. His life, on the contrary, was one big secret. His family's secret. The Madisons weren't just wealthy, they were invisible. Their names rarely appeared in the press, their business was diversified and tangled, and their influence was felt everywhere, from Wall Street to Capitol Hill. From childhood, he was taught the family rules. Don't use a personal credit card in certain places, don't talk about family business even on the phone, don't engage in open discussions on political or historical topics, especially if they concerned Russia or Alaska. At first, he thought they were the whims of eccentric rich people, but the older he got, the clearer he understood. These weren't rules, they were laws. Ellie, how's it going? James interrupted her thoughts. He knew what made her dissertation so special. It was about the sale of Alaska. She believed it was an honest, transparent agreement. Eleanor looked up, her radiant eyes glowing with passion. Just amazing, James. Can you imagine how much we gained from that deal? Only $7.2 million. It's just phenomenal. For a territory twice the size of Texas. She snapped her laptop shut and took a sip of her latte. I love this story. It demonstrates brilliant diplomatic skill. Russia, weakened by war, gets the necessary money, and we get a huge strategic territory. Professor Woods says it's a brilliant example of realism in international politics. James sighed heavily, his jaw clenching. Didn't she see the gaps? Have you ever wondered why all the documents on the deal from the Russian side were signed only by the ambassador? He asked, looking her straight in the eye. Not a single document with the Tsar's own signature. Doesn't that seem strange to you? Eleanor frowned. She was used to his strange questions. Of course not, James. He was an emperor. That's what ambassadors are for, to represent their country's interests. Besides, Russia was busy with internal problems, and it would have been too risky for the Tsar to appear publicly during tumultuous times, wouldn't it? And his 3-month mysterious illness. James persisted. Why did he not appear in public for 3 months right after signing the treaty? He was probably just sick, James. Eleanor shrugged. What else could it be? Not all historical events have to be dramatic and mysterious. Some just are what they are. Have you ever thought that the official version is what they want you to believe? His voice grew softer. That there's something behind the curtain? For example, that Alaska was sold not to the US government, but to a private company. Eleanor laughed. You sound just like my conspiracy theorist friends. Do you know they firmly believe that the Tsar's signature was severed along with his right hand when he signed the document? James flinched. What if it was? He almost blurted out. What if they're not wrong? Well, they are wrong, James. Those are just silly theories that have no basis. Eleanor straightened her hair, her tone becoming as hard as steel. Why would anyone invent such a complex story to hide the truth? Sometimes the truth is so inconvenient that a lie, no matter how unbelievable, seems more plausible, he replied quietly, thinking about the family rules. And about his family, which to this day does business with those very Europeans whose name was forbidden to be spoken aloud. Their argument would have continued if James's phone hadn't vibrated. A message from his father. Urgent. Save $20 million. Fifth Avenue. Waiting at 6 p.m. James went pale. He could barely focus his eyes on the screen. Fifth Avenue. A huge part of the family business was located there. One of their buildings. Something had happened. He knew his father never bothered him without a good reason. And if it concerned that much money, the reason was more than justified. This was the moment when his world of secrets and Eleanor's world were about to collide. And he wasn't sure he could handle it. Sorry, Ellie, I have to go, he said, abruptly getting up. Urgent business. Eleanor looked at him questioningly, but he was already hurrying toward the exit, leaving her alone with her familiar history. He ran out into the rain, forgetting his umbrella, and the downpour, as if mocking him, washed away the last vestiges of his normal life. He knew everything had changed. Forever. Chapter 2. 20 Million Reasons. The Washington rain, as if on cue, intensified as James ran outside. People rushed around him, sheltering under umbrellas, but he didn't notice them. Only one thought was swirling in his head. $20 million. Fifth Avenue. 6 p.m. His watch showed 3:30 p.m. The train to New York was 3.5 hours. By car in this weather, it would be 4, maybe more. He quickly hailed a taxi, slumped into the backseat, and gave the address for Union Station. Faster, please, he asked the driver. I have a train to catch. The train won't fly away, young man, the taxi driver, a native Washingtonian with an unruffled face, smirked. It's not a plane. James didn't reply. Everything inside him was tense to the limit. He tried to call his father, but he didn't pick up. The voicemail was short and businesslike. I'm driving, leave a message. James threw the phone onto the seat. He couldn't understand what had happened. 20 million was a huge amount of money even for their family. He went through all the possible scenarios in his mind, but none of them made sense. Their business didn't have such sudden failures. Everything had been calculated down to the smallest detail for decades. The Amtrak train sped along the tracks, devouring mile after mile. The view from the window, soggy suburbs, monotonous shopping malls, endless highways, seemed unreal to him, like a backdrop. His world, built from cozy evenings with Eleanor, arguments about the authenticity of historical facts, and coffee in his favorite cafe, was crumbling. He realized he was about to enter a world that had nothing to do with his current life, a world where different rules prevailed, and official history was just a smokescreen. He arrived in New York at exactly 5:55 p.m. The rain hadn't stopped. Fifth Avenue was choked with cars, and taxis, as if on cue, had disappeared. James jumped off the train, quickly walked past the crowds of tourists, and headed for the Madison Building. It loomed over everything, dark and powerful, like a rock in a stormy sea. The huge lobby, the marble floor, the portraits of ancestors on the walls, each gaze exuding eternity and steadfastness. His father was waiting for him on the 20th floor. John Madison, a tall, grey-haired man with a penetrating gaze, sat behind a massive mahogany desk. A folder with the Madison coat of arms lay on the table. The air in the office was heavy with silence. You're late, his father said, without looking at him. By 5 minutes. The train was delayed. James began to justify himself, but stopped. It was pointless in the face of his father. I told you, John Madison said, finally looking up. Use a plane. It's always more reliable. In our world, every minute matters, and money is just a way to buy that minute. James stepped closer. Dad, what happened? The 20 million. 20 million, James. His father smirked. Do you still think I'm talking about money? I wrote save $20 million, not lose $20 million. It was a test. And you failed. James felt the blood drain from his face. A test. What are you talking about? About family, James. About what's most important. About what we've been building for a century and a half. About what began in 1867. It's not money, son, it's a code. 20 million isn't dollars. It's 20 million rubles. And it's not a number, but a place. James was confused. 20 million rubles? Dad, that's nonsense. Not at all. It was a condition. We paid $7.2 million for Alaska. But there was a second, secret condition. We were obligated to invest 20 million rubles in the development of the Russian Empire. But we didn't do it. Instead, we bought gold mines in Alaska. That money became our capital. And now someone is trying to get what's theirs." James was silent. He felt as if he was hearing not his father, but some character from a spy novel. Who did this?" His father nodded toward an old portrait on the wall. It depicted one of their ancestors standing next to a man who looked like the Russian Tsar, the one who was always close. He decided it was time to get his due, and that we have to pay for it. "But who?" James looked at the portrait, then at his father. "It doesn't matter who," his father cut him off. "What matters is that on the other side, they play by the rules, and you must learn to understand them. You must learn. Now your task is to find out who it is, and do everything to make sure the story doesn't surface. Not a single person on the planet should know the truth about the Tsar's hand." James sank into the chair. His world, in which he argued with Eleanor about imaginary conspiracy theories, now turned out to be truer than all of official history combined. He had to choose between his family and Eleanor, between a lie and the truth, and he knew that his choice would have consequences for them both. Chapter 3. Back to reality. The return to Washington was even more difficult than the trip to New York. Every word from his father lay like a heavy stone on his soul. The story he had always considered nonsense turned out to be reality. The mysterious he from the portrait. The Tsar's hand. 20 million rubles. How was it all connected? And how was he, James, supposed to figure it out when even his father wouldn't give him clear answers? The first thing he did when he got back to his apartment was to call Eleanor. He needed to talk to her, to hear her voice, to make sure his former life still existed. But she didn't answer. James left a message. "Ellie, it's me. I'm sorry I left so abruptly. I need to see you. It's very important." He knew she was hurt. He had left too suddenly. And what would he tell her? "My family is part of a secret society that rules the world, and all your favorite historical facts are a lie." It sounded insane. He felt her slipping away from him. He decided to start his investigation. 20 million rubles, that was his starting point. He began searching the family archives, to which he had access only through his father's old computer. The folder he found was called Project 20M. It contained only dry numbers, graphs, and reports. No names. No mention of Russia. Just financial documentation. It was so boring it seemed like a true work of art in its disguise. What if I'm looking in the wrong place? James muttered to himself. He closed the computer and sat on the sofa, deep in thought. He was John Madison's son, but until today, he had been far from the family's affairs. He was educated, given access to information, but he was never a part of it. He had always walked his own path. And now he was caught in the middle of it all. James remembered his conversations with Eleanor. She always knew where to look for information. Her dissertation. Alaska again. He realized that the only person who could help, without knowing why he was doing it, was her. But how? He couldn't just say, "Ellie, help me find documents about secret deals with Alaska." She would think he was crazy. He needed a plan. A plan that would allow him to use her knowledge without revealing his secrets. Just then, his phone vibrated. It was a message from Eleanor. "Fine. I'll be at the university tomorrow. If you want to talk, come by. But only for business. I don't like being treated that way." James smiled. He knew she was angry, but he also knew she was ready to listen. This was his chance. He had to convince her. Tomorrow he would go to the university. And if he couldn't find the answers in the boring numbers, he would find them in the history that Eleanor so adored. He had to start a new game. A secretive, dangerous one. But now he had a goal. And he knew that not only his future, but the future of them both depended on it. Chapter 4. A Shadow in the Library. The next day, James sat in the Georgetown University Library, waiting for Eleanor. She arrived exactly at noon, wearing her favorite denim jacket, her hair in a messy bun. Her face was serious, but her eyes held a mix of curiosity and resentment. "I'm here," she said, sitting across from him. "So, what's so urgent?" James didn't know where to start. He couldn't tell her directly what had happened. He had to be as subtle as ice. "Ellie, I can't tell you what happened, but I can show you something." He took a small flash drive from his backpack, which contained the reports from the Project 20M folder. "These are family documents. They concern deals that my ancestors made in the late 19th century. They are very encrypted. I thought you, as a historian, might be able to help me. Maybe you'll see something I don't." Eleanor took the flash drive, Her eyebrows raised. She saw the same tables, the same numbers on the screen that made no sense. These look like ordinary financial reports, James. There's nothing special about them. What do you want me to find here? Do you remember what I said about the 20 million? He asked quietly. Something's not right with them. They should have been there, but they're not. I think they were invested in something that has nothing to do with finance. Eleanor shook her head skeptically. James, you and your secrets. Look, I'm still looking for material for my dissertation. Maybe we can search for something together? I've already dug through half the archives anyway. I know official history is often boring, but it is what it is. I'm not saying it's boring, Ellie. I'm just doubting. James tried to sound as convincing as possible. Let's dig into it together. You'll look for facts for your dissertation, and I'll just be by your side. She looked at him, and her eyes softened. Okay, but only until lunch. I have a lot to do. They got to work. Eleanor searched electronic databases, and James dug through old newspapers, trying to find any clue. In one of the 1,867 issues of the New York Times, he came across a small note. It was on the third page, about a certain Russian diplomat in Washington who had suddenly left the city due to personal matters. James remembered. Ambassador Eduard Stokel, the very one who signed the treaty. He left the city as soon as all the documents were signed, as if he was hiding something. Ellie, look. He showed her the note. Eleanor read it. So what? Diplomats are constantly traveling. But what if it's not personal matters? What if he left because something happened to him? What if someone blackmailed him into signing a document that didn't belong to him? Eleanor sighed. You're at it again. But you know, there's an old catalogue at the Boston Historical Society. It holds documents that haven't been digitized. My professor said they're just old financial reports, but maybe. James didn't let her finish. Boston. I agree. When do we leave? Her eyes widened in surprise. He was ready to travel to another state for some old, meaningless folder. Eleanor shook her head, but interest had already appeared in her eyes. She saw there was something behind his words, and she decided she had to find out. Her own curiosity, like his, was now involved in this game. A game in which she was blind, and he was the only one who knew the rules. Chapter 5. The Boston Labyrinth. The train ride to Boston was a long and silent journey, made even longer by the tension hanging between them. James and Eleanor sat in different seats, separated by the aisle, but he felt her presence, her tension, which was almost tangible. Ellie, absorbed in her laptop, occasionally took notes, frowned, and then returned to her screen. She was typing something, but James was sure it had nothing to do with her dissertation. She was also searching. Her own world, built on academic rigor and documentary truth, was cracking. He looked out the window, watching the landscapes change. The evergreen forests of New England gave way to suburban homes, and then to industrial zones. The rain that had started in Washington hadn't stopped, and the drops, running down the glass, created whimsical patterns. He thought about his father's words, about the 20 million, about the Tsar's hand. Now he felt not just like a son who had received a strange assignment, but a real spy conducting an investigation under cover, and it was both exciting and terrifying. James, Eleanor finally broke the silence, putting down her laptop. She moved to the empty seat across from him. Why are you so obsessed with this? Did something happen? You can trust me. I can see you're nervous. James sighed heavily. He wanted to tell her everything, but he couldn't. He was bound by a promise he had made to himself and his father. He was part of something bigger than himself, and it was his curse. It's just, I feel like the history they tell us is incomplete, and I want to find the missing part. It's like, as if you were reading a book, and 100 pages were missing. You would want to find those pages, right? But that's my job, she objected, her voice with a hint of her former skepticism. I'm a historian. I know how to search. And I don't like that you're playing some kind of games, James. It's not like you. But I know where to look, he said, meeting her gaze. My family has old connections. Very old ones. I can't explain, but it's true. Just trust me. I know it sounds crazy, but I'm sure we'll find something important in Boston. She shook her head but didn't argue. The haughty expression was no longer on her face. Instead, there was curiosity, a spark of excitement that he so loved in her. When they arrived in Boston, the weather was overcast. They took a taxi and headed to the Historical Society. It was an old, Victorian building that looked like nothing had been changed since World War II. Inside, it smelled of old paper, dust, and history. It was a smell that Eleanor adored. I arranged with Professor Woods. He called here, Eleanor said as they walked down a long corridor. We need to ask the archivist, Mr. Beanham. Mr. Beanham turned out to be a small, scrawny old man with a thick grey beard that almost completely hid his face. He was wearing a tweed jacket, and on his nose were thick glasses that made his eyes look huge. Ah, Eleanor. His voice was quiet but piercing, like the squeak of an old door. Professor Woods warned me. You're looking for those useless financial reports, aren't you? I told him they weren't useless. There's something in them. I feel it. James was surprised. He thought only he and his father saw something more in those documents. You believe there's something in them? He asked. Ah, the old man said. History, young man, isn't just a set of dates. It's about people and their actions. And when people hide something, they leave traces. Usually where no one will look. In boring, dusty archives that are waiting for their time. It's like looking for a needle in a haystack, but when the needle becomes a magnet, it's easy to find. He led them down a narrow, dark corridor that led to the basement. The basement was filled with old books and folders. He stopped at one shelf, which was cluttered with papers, and pulled out an old, worn folder. Here, financial reports on road construction in the Russian Empire. 1868. I always thought it was nonsense, but I look through them every year. Too many numbers. James took the folder. He leafed through it, and his heart pounded wildly. He saw the numbers, and they were not random. Each report was marked with a letter, which, he realized, was a code. 20 million. Rubles. Roads. He looked at the map attached to the report. An area was marked on it, one of the most remote in Alaska. There were no roads there. There was nothing. But there was something else. Mr. Beanham, James asked, why these particular reports? Ah, the old man said, because the money that was paid never reached the treasury. I found that in an old newspaper. Some journalist wrote about it. He was killed a week later. Why kill a journalist for writing that money that should have been paid was not paid? Think about it, young man. Eleanor and James exchanged glances. For the first time, she felt that her world, built on official facts, was cracking. The history she considered simple and understandable turned out to be a tangled ball of secrets. She realized that James was right. And something in her changed. Her skepticism gave way to curiosity. And now she wanted to know what was hidden behind these financial reports. Chapter 6. The Secret in the Old Newspapers. After meeting with Mr. Beanham, James and Eleanor returned to Washington, but as different people. Eleanor was no longer just a skeptic. She had become a partner. She didn't know the whole truth, but she was on her way to it. They sat in her cozy apartment, laying out the old reports that Mr. Beanham had given them on the table. The fresh coffee that Eleanor had just brewed filled the room with aroma, but they paid no attention to it. Did you see this, James? Eleanor asked, pointing to a note at the bottom of one of the pages. Project Bravo. There's no mention of such a project anywhere in the archives. In none of the documents I've seen. It's as if someone erased it from history. My family. James nodded, his voice hollow. That's what they do. They've been doing it for a century and a half. They hide facts that don't fit the official version. It's like editing. Only they're editing reality. Eleanor shook her head, her eyes wide. This is just insane. To think how much we don't know. How much of what we believe to be true is actually just a well-thought-out lie. Now you understand why I was so worried. James took her hand. I didn't want you to get into this world. It's dangerous. My father, he wasn't like this before. This secret changed him. She didn't pull her hand away. And you didn't want me to find out. But I want to know. I need to know. My dissertation, my career, everything I thought about myself could turn out to be a lie. My belief in history, in facts. Not a lie. Just an incomplete truth, he said, his voice becoming softer. And that's the whole difference. A lie is when you deliberately hide something. And an incomplete truth is when you just don't know the whole picture. And we are putting it together now. They moved on to the next step. James decided they needed help. He remembered his old friend, Thomas. Thomas was a computer genius who had been obsessed with cryptography since he was a teenager. He always joked that he would hack all the secrets of the world, and now his jokes were no longer jokes. James called him, explained the situation without going into details. Thomas, surprised that James was turning to him with such a request, agreed to help. A few hours later, Thomas arrived at Eleanor's apartment. He was short, with disheveled hair and glasses that kept sliding down his nose. He quickly scanned the reports. He didn't ask unnecessary questions. He just worked. His fingers danced across the keyboard. "It's not a cipher," he said, after a while, leaning back in his chair. "It's a code. It's like a map. Look. Each number is a coordinate, and each report is a key to the next one. It's like a game." James and Eleanor exchanged surprised glances. "So, these aren't just reports," Eleanor said. It's a treasure map." Thomas nodded. "Yes, and it's a map that leads to Alaska, to an area where there's nothing but wilderness, abandoned mines, places that have been forgotten by history, but not by those who started it all." James remembered the map he had seen in Boston. The same area was marked on it. He realized that his father hadn't just sent him on an investigation. He had sent him on a treasure hunt, for a treasure that held a family secret. "We need to go there," James said. "I know it's crazy, but we have to do it. We have to see it with our own eyes." Eleanor looked at him, then at Thomas, then at the reports. She hesitated, but only for a moment. She was on the verge of a discovery that could turn all of history on its head. She couldn't back down. "When do we leave?" she asked. James smiled. He was ready for this. Chapter 7, The Road North. The trip to Alaska was long and exhausting. They decided to fly to Juneau, and from there, rent a car and drive north, toward the coordinates on the map. Eleanor and James were completely thrilled by the adventure. For the first time, they were truly together, as partners. Their arguments about history were now a joint search for the truth. "So, here's the 20 million, Eleanor said, looking at the map. They were supposed to go to the development of Russia, but instead, they were invested in this, in a place where there's nothing. And what's here? Gold." "Possibly." James nodded. "My family is in the gold business. They first got into it in the late 19th century, right around the time Alaska was sold. It was the perfect cover. They got what they wanted, and no one knew about it." "Unbelievable," she muttered. "So those 20 million that were supposed to go to the development of Russia went to the development of your family's business? And how can you live with that?" "I can't. And that's why I want to find out all this," he said. "I want to understand what happened. And why. I need to understand who I really am." They drove along a road surrounded by forest. The air was clean and cool. Outside the window, snow-covered mountains were visible, even in late spring. The road became more and more winding and narrow. They were almost at their destination. "You know, James," Eleanor said, "I always thought that historians were people who knew the answers. But now I realize we are just people who ask questions, and that the truth can be much more complicated than we think." "What if all this is a lie?" James asked. "What if all these documents are fake? What if someone just wants to deceive us?" "Then we'll find that out," she looked at him with a smile. "But we have to know. We have to get to the bottom of this. And I'm with you. To the very end." He smiled back. He felt that he had finally found his way. He wasn't just part of a family. He was James Madison. And he was ready to find out what awaited him ahead. Chapter 8, The Lost Village. The road ended, and they had to go on foot. They were in the wilderness, far from civilization. The coordinates pointed to an abandoned mountain village. It was old. The wooden houses had rotted, and only the frames remained. The air was heavy and damp. They walked through the village and felt like they had stepped into another time. "Someone lived here," James muttered. "Someone who was involved in gold." "And someone hid this place," Eleanor said. "And very carefully. This place doesn't look like an abandoned mine. It was abandoned, but not forgotten." They found an old, dilapidated house that was different from all the others. It was built of stone and was much stronger. An old, rusty lock hung on the door. James took a crowbar from his backpack and tried to open it. The lock gave way, and they went inside. The house was empty. There was no furniture, just dust and cobwebs. But in the center of the room, there was a trapdoor that led to a basement. They opened it and went down. The basement was dark and cold. There was an old chest in it, covered with a layer of dust that seemed to have been there forever. James opened it, and they saw what they believed shouldn't exist. Inside were documents dated 1867. Letters, reports, maps. And it was all in Russian. James started reading. And what he read turned his world upside down. The documents spoke of a deal that was never supposed to be revealed. That Alaska was sold for $7.2 million, but only as part of a larger game. A mysterious European company. Gold mines. The Tsar's hand. One of the letters said that the limb was given in exchange for signing the treaty. This was proof. Irrefutable. Eleanor looked at him, and her eyes were filled with horror. So, it's all true, she whispered. It's all true. I told you. James nodded. But that's not all. He took another document from the chest. It was a list. A list of members of the secret society. And he saw names there. His ancestors. And the names of other families that were part of the American elite. And at the very bottom of the list, he saw a familiar name. A name that belonged to a family that had been his family's enemy for many years. A name that belonged to a family that ran the bank that was part of their business. He realized who was behind this whole game. Chapter 9. The Enemy Within. James and Eleanor sat in a hotel room, studying the documents they had found in the chest. They were shocked. The history they knew was a complete lie. This whole deal with Alaska was a cover-up for something much bigger. The mysterious European company that was mentioned was created by his ancestors and other influential families. This is just incredible, Eleanor said, sifting through the papers. Why would they need this? Why such a complicated plan? Power. James was grim. They wanted to gain control of the gold. The Russian government was weakened, and they needed an excuse to legally enter the territory. They gave them money for development, but instead, they got what they wanted, and they did it without leaving any traces. But who did this? Who is trying to expose us now? Eleanor asked. James looked at her. Our eternal rival. The Andersons. The Andersons. Eleanor remembered that this was the name of one of the richest and most influential bankers in the world. But why? They're part of this system too. Because they want it for themselves, James said. They don't want to share. And they want to rewrite history so that we are the villains, and they are the heroes. And they know that the truth is the most powerful weapon. They want to destroy us using our own secret. Just then, James's phone rang. It was his father. He didn't answer, but he felt he had to. Dad, we found the documents. We know who it is. It's the Andersons. I know, son. His father's voice was heavy. But it's not that simple. They want you to find those documents. They want you to expose this secret so that you'll side with them. James put the phone down. Eleanor took his hand. What will you do, James? Will you protect your family? Or will you protect the truth? He didn't answer. He didn't know what to do. He was at a crossroads. His family, his past, his future. It was all in question now. He had to choose. And he knew that his choice would have consequences for the whole world. Chapter 10. Truth and Consequences. James and Eleanor returned to Washington, but as different people. They had the truth, a truth that could turn everything upside down. They sat in James's apartment, surrounded by newspapers, documents, letters. They were like two investigators who had dug up a truth that had nothing to do with their lives, but at the same time, was their life. What now? Eleanor asked. We have to publish this. We have to tell the world. But, what will happen to my family? James hesitated. They're guilty, James, Eleanor said. They're part of this. They've been lying for a century and a half. They've hidden a truth that should have been known. And you have to decide if you will protect that lie. James sighed heavily. He picked up the old document he had found in the chest. It had a list of all the members of the secret society. He saw his family name there, the Andersons' name, the names of other families that were part of the American elite. He realized that they were all part of one big game. I can't do it, he said. I can't just erase my family from my life. You're not erasing it, Eleanor said. You're just making it part of a new, honest life. You're making it part of history. The real history. Just then, there was a knock on the door. It was his father. He came into the room, his face pale. James, you know what's happening. The Andersons are threatening us. They want us to reveal ourselves so they can take control. You have to choose. James looked at his father, then at Eleanor. He realized that his choice was not between family and truth. It was a choice between the past and the future. Between a lie and honesty. I've already chosen, Dad, he said. I won't be a part of this. I won't protect the lie. I'll protect the truth. John Madison looked at him. His face was pale. He didn't say a word. He just turned and left. James and Eleanor were left alone. They sat in silence. They knew that their lives would change forever. Their story, which began with a small argument about history, ended with a big decision. A decision that could change the world. But they weren't afraid. They were together. And they were ready for what awaited them. They were ready to write their own history. A story in which truth is not something to be sought, but something to be made. And in which love is not something to be hidden, but something to be revealed. They were ready to start a new chapter. A chapter that would be filled with truth. And that was their greatest treasure.